I stood at the back of my father's grand estate, feeling like a ghost in my own skin. The long driveway stretched ahead, flanked by columns of manicured trees, the mansion looming above me, its cold stone walls reflecting the brightness of the afternoon sun. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I was. I had to be. My name is Caroline. I'm 42 years old, and the only thing that still ties me to this place is the fact that it was once my home, though it felt like I'd been erased from it long before my father died. Today, it was supposed to be a day of celebration, a ceremony marking the inheritance of his estate, but I knew better than to expect any recognition. I wasn't part of their world anymore. The family was gathered up front in the grandiose parlor, ignoring me as they always did. My mother, always polished, sat front and center next to my three brothers. Each of them wore that look of success, that we've got it all figured out expression, while I stood in the back, a silent observer to a life that was never meant for me. I glanced at my mother. Her hair was carefully styled, her pearls glinting in the light as if nothing had ever changed between us. But I knew better. I knew the truth, how they'd all dismissed me as the failure, the one who hadn't lived up to their impossible standards. The family lawyer, a man I didn't recognize, stood by the podium at the front. He cleared his throat, holding a thick envelope in his hands, ready to read from my father's will. My heart didn't race. It was numb by now. I had long ago prepared myself for this moment, the moment they officially erased me from their lives. Mr. Mays's estate, as per his wishes, will be divided among his children, the lawyer began, his voice echoing in the vast room. James, Luke, and Ben, the remainder will be left to the Mays Foundation. I swallowed hard. My name, of course, wasn't mentioned. It didn't even deserve a footnote. I stood there silent, feeling like a phantom. Nobody looked at me. Not my brothers, not my mother, not the lawyer. The air in the room thickened with an uncomfortable tension, and I was certain they all knew I was there, but chose to pretend I wasn't. The lawyer turned another page, skimming through the document. Then, just when it seemed like they would continue ignoring me, the door slammed open with a force that cut through the tension. 12 men walked in, their synchronized steps echoing across the marble floors. They wore civilian suits, but their posture, their presence, it was unmistakable. They were veterans, and they were there for me. I recognized the lead man immediately, a familiar face from the past. His name was Hartley, and he was one of my SEALs. The room fell silent as the men filed into the space, each one standing tall, unwavering in their loyalty. Hartley stepped forward, his eyes locking with mine, before he turned toward the gathered family. With all due respect, he said, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear, this is not just about inheritance, this is about legacy, the legacy of Caroline Mays. He stepped to my side and handed me a small patch, green with embroidered letters that read, Guide. It was my title, my legacy. The room stayed still. My family watched in stunned silence as Hartley and the others saluted me. They'd known me as a soldier, a leader, but they'd never seen me like this. Seen me for what I truly was, not just the failure they had always called me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. And my family, they couldn't look away. Caroline Mays was the heart and soul of our team, Hartley continued. She led us, guided us through every mission, and she did it without question. The legacy she built is not just hers, it's ours too. There it was. The truth laid bare in front of them. My legacy, a legacy they had chosen to ignore, to erase, but not anymore. The silence in the room was deafening as my family slowly realized what had just happened. The truth they had never wanted to see had finally been revealed. And I was done playing their game. It wasn't always like this. Once I was part of the family. At least that's what I convinced myself when I was younger. I'd always been the odd one out, yes, but there was a time when I thought maybe one day they'd see me for who I truly was. But that was a dream, and I'd learned long ago that dreams, especially with this family, were just things to wake up from. I can still remember when I was just a kid, sitting at the dinner table, listening to the sound of my brothers laughing and sharing stories. It should have been a moment of joy, but I felt like an outsider even then. They were the golden children, the ones who made my parents proud. James, the perfect oldest son, charming and effortlessly brilliant. Luke, the quiet genius, always topping the class in everything. And Ben, the youngest, who could do no wrong. And then there was me, Caroline, the one who didn't quite fit, the one who tried too hard, failed too often, and never seemed to get it right. One evening, I remember sitting at that very dinner table, trying to join in the conversation. But the moment I opened my mouth, James cut me off. Caroline, you wouldn't understand, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Yeah, Luke chimed in, smirking at me. You're just not built for this kind of thing. They all laughed. My parents? They said nothing. Mom just looked at me with that empty, polite smile, as if her eyes were saying, Not now, sweetheart. Not now. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. That night, my mind raced. Was I really that different? I wanted to believe I wasn't. I wanted to believe that the love I poured into this family, the sacrifices I made, trying to fit in, trying to get approval, would finally count for something. But deep down, I knew. It never would. A few weeks after that dinner, my brother James had made a point to mock me. We were sitting around the kitchen table one evening, and I had just shared some news about a project I was working on, a training course I had designed to help soldiers transition back into civilian life. Wow, James laughed. A training course for soldiers. How cute. My heart dropped, but I didn't show it. I never did. You know, Caroline, he continued, the words dripping like venom, I just don't think you're cut out for anything. You're always starting things and never finishing them. It's almost like you think you're special. You're not. I tried to swallow the sting, but it felt like a lump lodged in my throat. I felt my breath get shallow, the weight of his words sinking into me. James, leave her alone, Ben said weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. Their words, their laughter, they all blurred into one, each insult stacking up on top of the last. The truth was, no matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up to the image they had of the perfect child. The one who had it all together, who didn't need anyone's help, who always knew the right answer. But I was different. I didn't fit into their world. And no matter how many times I tried, no matter how many things I did to prove I belonged, it never mattered. At age 22, I decided enough was enough. I stood up from that dinner table one night, left a note on the kitchen counter, and walked out without a word. I enlisted in the Navy. I didn't look back. I didn't even say goodbye to my father, the man who had for years silently watched me be pushed aside by my family. There was a moment before I left, a brief glance across the room where our eyes met. I could see it in his eyes, the quiet regret, the unspoken apology. But he didn't say anything. He never did. I walked out of the house with only one thing in my mind. I had to do this for me. I had to leave and prove that I wasn't just the failure my family saw me as. I had to find something, anything, that would make me feel like I had a place in this world. That was the moment I left them all behind, without telling anyone, without a goodbye, just me and my decision. The moment I enlisted, I felt like I was finally making a choice that was mine. I wasn't just doing it to earn their approval or to fix their perceptions of me. I was doing it because I knew I could. I didn't expect to become the woman I was about to become. But when I made that decision, it was the first time in my life I felt like I was taking control. And even though it was the hardest thing I'd ever done, leaving my family behind, leaving their judgments, their sneers, and their silent disregard, was the best decision I ever made. I was no longer trying to fit into their world. I was about to build my own, and no one could take that away from me. Boot camp wasn't what I expected. I don't know what I thought it would be. Maybe some glorified version of a military movie where everyone was strong, fast, and unstoppable. But the reality hit me hard the first day. It was brutal. The drill instructors screamed at us from the moment we stepped off the bus, their voices cutting through the air like knives. I had never been in that kind of physical and mental pressure before. The constant push, the exhaustion, the frustration, it made me want to break down. But I didn't. I refused to. I kept my head down and kept moving. I wasn't the fastest, the strongest, or the best at anything, but I never stopped. I was determined. Every time I stumbled, I picked myself up. Every time my body screamed for rest, I told myself to shut up and keep going. I wasn't going to be the weak link. I wasn't going to be the one who quit. At first, the other recruits looked at me like I didn't belong. I wasn't the loudest or the most athletic. I was just there. But I didn't care. All I cared about was proving I could do this, that I could earn my place in this world. It didn't take long before I noticed something. While I wasn't the best, I was always there. Always standing when others couldn't, always pushing through when others dropped out. I might not have been the one who ran the fastest lap, but I was the one who was still running when everyone else had quit. I earned respect, not with my speed or my strength, but with my grit, my persistence. And little by little, I began to feel something inside me change. I wasn't the failure anymore. I wasn't the outcast who couldn't measure up to everyone's standards. I was something else, something stronger. By the time boot camp was over, I wasn't the fastest, but I was the most dependable. I'd made it through the toughest challenges, and I knew I could survive whatever was coming next. After boot camp came the real training, SEAL training. This was the place where the real soldiers were forged, the ones who could endure anything, the ones who could push themselves past the breaking point and still come out on top. It was even harder than boot camp. It was the kind of training that made you question everything about yourself. Every day was a test, a trial of strength, mental endurance, and willpower. I stumbled through it, not with grace, but with sheer determination. There were days when I felt like I couldn't take another step, days when I felt like my body was betraying me, but I never quit. It wasn't easy, but I never quit. And eventually, I started rising through the ranks. Not because I was the best, but because I was the one who kept showing up. I wasn't the fastest swimmer, the best marksman, or the toughest guy in the room, but I was the one who kept going when everyone else faltered. The more I trained, the more I realized I wasn't the person I used to be. The person my family had always dismissed as a failure. The person who couldn't measure up. I had earned my place here. Not by being perfect, not by being the fastest or the strongest, but by being unbreakable. And when I finally earned my stripes, when I rose to the rank of captain, it wasn't because of natural talent. It was because of my persistence, my leadership, and my ability to bring others along with me. I wasn't a SEAL because I had the best skills. I was a SEAL because I never gave up, and that made all the difference. In the quiet moments, when I would stand at the edge of the water, feeling the wind on my face and the weight of the training I'd been through, I realized something important. I wasn't just a soldier. I wasn't just a leader. I was finally the person I had always wanted to be, strong, unyielding, and proud of who I had become. And I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially my family, define me again. I had finally found my purpose, and nothing could take that away. The mission came in like a storm, a black ops operation, the kind where failure wasn't an option, and the stakes were higher than I'd ever faced before. There was no room for mistakes, no room for hesitation. It was do or die. And as always, I led my team, the 12 SEALs who had become my brothers, out into the unknown. We were dropped into hostile territory, a location so far off the grid that even satellite images were fuzzy. The mission was simple on paper: gather intel, eliminate high-value targets, and get out clean. But nothing was ever simple when you were this deep behind enemy lines. From the moment we touched down, things started to go wrong. A routine check turned into a firefight. A series of explosions shattered the stillness of the night. We lost communications with command. The enemy was everywhere, and we were stuck in the middle of it. I could feel the tension building in my chest as we moved through the dense jungle, the sounds of gunfire echoing from every direction. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the weight of uncertainty. The clock was ticking, and every second mattered. It didn't take long before the mission spiraled out of control. We lost 2 men on the first day. We didn't even have time to mourn them. There was no room for grief in that kind of environment. Every step forward felt like we were digging deeper into a hole with no way out. By day 3, we were surrounded. Ammo was running low and our supplies were nearly gone. We had no way to call for backup. The terrain was unforgiving. The only thing keeping us alive was sheer determination. And the fact that we were SEALs. We didn't quit. I could see the fear in the eyes of some of the guys. They were exhausted, both physically and mentally. We were running on fumes, but I couldn't show them weakness. I had to keep them going, keep them focused. We were all that stood between survival and disaster. The decision I made that day wasn't easy. We were pinned down, with no way to safely extract ourselves. The only way out was through the heart of the enemy's stronghold. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only option we had left. "We're going to make it through this," I told them, my voice steady even though I could feel my own doubt creeping in. "We push forward no matter what. We get the intel, we complete the mission, and we get out together." They looked at me, every one of them trusting me with their lives. In that moment, I wasn't just their leader. I was their anchor, and I wasn't going to let them down. The next few days were hell. We fought through ambush after ambush, using everything we had left to stay alive. I made decisions that would haunt me forever, decisions that put my men's lives on the line, but we kept moving. We kept fighting. There was no turning back now. By the time we reached the extraction point, we were broken, physically battered, mentally shattered. But we were alive. We made it. The chopper that came to pick us up was the only thing that kept us from total collapse. The doors opened, and I could feel the weight of the mission lifting from my shoulders as we scrambled aboard. As we ascended into the sky, the jungle below looked so small, so far away. The men sat in silence. We didn't need words. We had all seen what we were capable of, what we had survived. And even though we had lost so much, we had gained something too, a bond stronger than anything we could ever put into words. That's when it happened. As the chopper flew us back to base, Hartley, my second in command, stood up and walked toward me. In his hand was something small, a patch. It was embroidered in green with the word guide on it. "I think you're the one who led us through this, Caroline," he said, his voice low but filled with pride. "We wouldn't have made it without you." I looked at him and then at the others, 12 men, all of them standing tall, saluting me. The men I had led through hell. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the failure. I didn't feel like the one who couldn't live up to the expectations. I had earned my place, not just as a soldier, but as a leader. In that moment, I wasn't Caroline Mays, the girl who had been erased by her family. I was the guide. The truth had come full circle, and I wasn't invisible anymore. The legacy they had tried to steal from me, the one they had never recognized, was now in plain view for everyone to see, and nothing would ever be the same again. The news of my father's death came to me in the most impersonal way possible. It wasn't a call from my family or even from someone I trusted. No, it was Mrs. Jenkins, an old neighbor of ours, the kind who seemed to know everything about everyone, calling me from her kitchen table. "Caroline, darling, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this, but your father passed away early this morning." Her voice was frail, almost like she was delivering bad news about a stranger. "I thought you should hear it from someone. Your mother and brothers, well, I don't know if they've even gotten around to telling you." My world stopped. My father, the man I had never really connected with, was gone. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since I walked away from the family that had made me feel invisible. But still, a piece of me had always hoped, just once, he'd recognize me, see me for who I really was. I didn't know what to feel. Maybe I should have felt grief or anger or even relief, but all I could feel was a cold, detached numbness that enveloped me. The funeral was a blur. I wasn't invited, of course, but word traveled fast, and I knew when it was happening. I stood at the back of the church, watching from the shadows as my family filed in, neatly dressed, the epitome of perfect grief. The kind that never feels real. The kind that hides the secrets, the betrayals, the unfinished business that had been left between us. I wasn't even sure why I was there. Maybe I had hoped for some kind of closure. Maybe I wanted to see if my family would acknowledge me, at least in that moment. But when they glanced in my direction, they quickly turned away, their eyes as cold as ever. I wasn't family, not really. That night, I went back to my small apartment and stared at the ceiling, the silence almost suffocating. I had never been particularly close to my father, but something about his death, the fact that I hadn't been told directly, hit me in a place I wasn't prepared for. It confirmed everything I already knew. I was nothing to them. A few days later, I received the letter from my father's lawyer. I almost didn't open it. I knew what was inside. My father's will. The will that I hadn't been a part of. I had already accepted that I wouldn't be mentioned. That was no surprise. But I had to see it. I had to read it, even if it was just to prove that I wasn't just a shadow in their lives. I opened it slowly, expecting the sting. As I read through the legal jargon, one phrase jumped out at me like a slap across the face. The Mays Foundation will be under the control of James Mays, with Luke Mays overseeing the distribution of funds. My name wasn't there. It wasn't even a footnote, but there was something more. A sentence buried deep in the fine print that made my blood run cold. Caroline Mays is hereby excluded from any and all holdings, businesses, and rights to the Mays estate and will receive no inheritance. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel shock. Just a deep, familiar numbness. I had known this would happen. My family had always made it clear. I was a failure, a disappointment, and someone they had no use for. This was just the final confirmation. I sat with that letter in my hands for hours, letting the weight of it sink in. It wasn't the money that hurt. I didn't care about that. It was the truth that I had been erased. Not just from my father's life, but from everything they had built, everything they held dear. They had never seen me as part of their world, and now, even in death, my father had chosen to keep me out. But something inside me shifted. A decision had already been made. I wasn't going to fight for what wasn't mine. I wasn't going to beg for recognition or validation from people who never cared about me. Instead, I did the one thing that I knew would hurt them the most. I walked away. Not just from the inheritance, from the entire damn family. I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. I was free. Finally, free from the expectations, from the guilt, from the belief that I was somehow obligated to prove myself to them. The truth had come out. The truth was that I didn't need them. So I let it go. I let everything go. It was time to live life on my own terms, without the chains they tried to shackle me with. But that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Life went on in its quiet, predictable rhythm. I kept my head down, focused on what I had built, teaching survival skills to veterans, running a small but dedicated center where we helped soldiers transition back to civilian life. It wasn't glamorous, and it sure as hell wasn't easy, but it was mine. It was real. It was a purpose I had found after walking away from everything my family had ever expected from me. And yet, despite the solitude I had come to enjoy, there was always a piece of me that felt unfinished. I had walked away from my family, yes, but deep down I was still haunted by the idea that I hadn't fully confronted them, that I hadn't forced them to see who I really was. That's when the call came. It was Hartley, the same man who had handed me the guide patch all those years ago. We had kept in touch, of course. He'd been there through everything, the missions, the struggles, the triumphs. He was family in a way, the only family that had ever mattered. Caroline, his voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency behind it. It's time. I froze, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Time for what? He didn't hesitate. You know what I mean. Your family, the inheritance. It's all a lie. It's time to reveal the truth. Not for revenge, not for anything personal, but because they need to know who you really are, what you really did. I hadn't expected this. My gut twisted as his words sunk in. The anger that I'd pushed aside for so long stirred inside me. He was right. My family had always ignored me. They'd erased me, and now they were living with the consequences of that choice. But Hartley wasn't asking me to confront them for my sake. He was asking me to do it for the truth, for the people who had never understood what I had given up, the blood, the sweat, the sacrifices, to build the legacy they had discarded. I sighed, looking out the window at the horizon. What do you need me to do? The inheritance ceremony's coming up. We've got the support, Caroline. We can finally do this right. But we need you there. We need you to show them who you are, once and for all. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. My mind raced back to the day I stood in the back of that grand estate, feeling like a ghost, watching my family play their part in the world they had built without me. Could I really go back there? Could I face them after everything? The truth was, I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I couldn't let them keep pretending. I couldn't let them continue living in their fantasy while I faded away into nothing. All right, I said, the decision final, like a lock clicking into place. I'll be there. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You sure? Because this will get ugly, Caroline. They'll try to erase you again. And this time, you won't just be a shadow. This time, you'll be everything they've been pretending doesn't exist. I've been erased my whole life, Hartley. This time, I'm not just showing up for them. I'm showing up for me. It was a quiet, resolute statement, the kind of statement I had never made when I was in their world. But this was different. This was my moment, the moment I reclaimed what they had taken from me. I'll see you there, Hartley said. And then, in his usual way, he added, We're all behind you, Caroline. You won't be alone. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking just slightly. I wasn't sure how it would go. I didn't know what would happen when I walked into that room, when I saw their faces again. But I did know this. I wasn't walking into that room as the failure they had always made me out to be. I wasn't walking in to ask for their approval. I was walking in to make sure they saw me for who I really was. The truth would come out, and this time they wouldn't be able to ignore it. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at my reflection for a long moment. The person staring back at me was someone I barely recognized, but at the same time, she was the person I had always wanted to be. Strong, unyielding, ready for whatever came next. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of triumph, not yet, but it was a smile of peace. A smile that said, I'm ready for this. It was time to go back, and when I did, it would be on my terms. No one could erase me anymore. The ceremony was held in the grand ballroom of my family's estate, the place I'd once called home, though it felt like a foreign world to me now. The mansion gleamed in the late afternoon light, its tall windows casting long shadows across the polished floors. The air was thick with old money and tradition, a place where nothing ever changed unless it was carefully curated. I arrived early, slipping in through a side entrance that led straight to the back of the room, away from the gaze of anyone who might notice me. I hadn't been invited, but that didn't matter. I wasn't here to ask for permission. I was here to expose the lies and the truth, my truth, and I would do it on my terms. The ballroom was already full of guests, lawyers, business partners, a few family friends, all dressed in designer clothes and expensive perfume. Laughter bubbled up in the air, smooth and hollow, just like everything else in this room. They were all here to witness the end of an era, to watch my family receive the inheritance my father had left behind. And yet, I stood in the back, ignored and invisible, as always. They didn't even know I was here yet. The lawyer, the same one who had read my father's will a few days ago, stood at the podium, preparing to make his announcement. He was speaking in that professional tone that carried no emotion, just the dry business of a family falling apart. I scanned the room and saw them. My mother sitting front and center with my three brothers flanking her. They looked perfect, polished, like the ideal family everyone envied. James, the oldest, was leaning back with that smug grin, his eyes gleaming with the confidence that had always come so easily to him. Luke, the second son, stood with quiet authority, his dark eyes scanning the room as though calculating every move. Ben, the youngest, was nervously adjusting his tie, clearly trying to look important, but none of them saw me. None of them acknowledged my presence in the back. To them, I was still the outsider, the failure, and I was going to make them see just how wrong they were. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline, and that's when it happened. The door slammed open with a force that cut through the room like a storm. The guests stopped mid-conversation, and all eyes turned toward the entrance. 12 men walked in, each one wearing a tailored suit, their movements so synchronized that it looked almost rehearsed. The air seemed to shift as if they carried something more than just their presence. They were veterans. Hartley was at the front, leading them. He had always been the one to take charge, the one who could hold the room without saying a word. The men filed in, standing tall with unwavering resolve. My heart raced as I watched them. They weren't just any men. They were the ones who had seen me at my best and my worst. They were the ones who had stood by me when the rest of the world turned away. And now they were here, standing in front of my family, loyal to me in a way that none of them ever had been. Hartley stepped forward, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Even my family, who had been caught in conversation, looked up in confusion. Ladies and gentlemen, Hartley said, his voice carrying across the room, I'm here to set the record straight. Caroline Mays is not just a soldier. She's the legacy that your family has been trying to forget. The words hit like a punch. I could see my mother's face freeze, her smile fading as she looked from Hartley to me, her expression a mixture of surprise and horror. My brothers were all staring now, trying to make sense of what was happening. Hartley stepped aside, and I walked toward the front of the room, feeling every eye on me. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the ghost they had tried to erase. In Hartley's hands was a patch, the one I had earned, the one that meant everything to me. The word guide was embroidered in green on the fabric. It wasn't just a title. It was the symbol of my leadership, my commitment, my legacy. I took the patch from Hartley and held it up for everyone to see. This, I said, my voice steady, is the truth. This is who I am. This is the legacy that has been ignored, dismissed, and forgotten by this family. But it's time you all knew the truth. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of their disbelief, their discomfort, but I didn't care. They had ignored me for so long, had written me off as a failure. Now I was standing in front of them, not as an outsider, but as someone who had earned their place in the world. Hartley saluted me. The other men followed suit, their hands snapping up in perfect synchronization. The sound of 12 men standing together in respect echoed through the ballroom, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need them to say a word. The truth was undeniable. The truth was right in front of them, and they could no longer ignore it. My mother looked like she was about to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. James's eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Luke shifted uncomfortably, but even he couldn't find the words. Ben, the youngest, was just staring at me, his face a mix of confusion and realization. I stood there letting the silence stretch between us. They didn't need to apologize. They didn't need to acknowledge me. The truth was already out there. I turned toward Hartley and nodded. He took a step back, signaling the men to leave the room. They followed, their presence lingering in the air even after they had gone. And as I stood there, in the middle of the room, with my family looking at me for the first time as though I truly mattered, I realized something. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built my own legacy, and nothing could take that from me. I didn't need to say a word. My silence spoke louder than anything they could ever say. And when I left that room, I left with my head held high, knowing that the truth would follow me, whether they liked it or not. The ceremony was over, and the room was still buzzing with awkward murmurs and lingering glances. My family was trying to process what had just happened, still unsure of how to react. But I didn't need their approval, not anymore. I had done what I came to do. I made them see the truth. I walked to the door, not in a rush, not with any sense of urgency. I wasn't running from anything anymore. My steps were steady, calm, as though I had already won the battle. The battle had never been about the inheritance or about them acknowledging me. It had always been about me seeing myself for who I really was and finally showing them the woman I had become. Before I reached the door, I turned around one last time. I wasn't sure why. I wasn't expecting an apology, and I wasn't looking for any kind of closure. But in that moment, I realized I wanted to hear something. Anything that might mean my family saw me. Not the failure, not the disappointment, but the person I had become. I didn't have to wait long. "Caroline," my mother said, her voice shaking slightly as she stood from her seat. She had been sitting there, motionless, as if trying to convince herself that what had just unfolded wasn't real. "Please, don't leave like this. We're family." I didn't respond right away. I wanted to, but not in the way she probably expected. Instead, I let the silence fill the room between us. The words I had wanted to say for so many years bubbled up, but this time I wouldn't say them in anger. This time I would say them with a calm that was completely new to me. "I'm not leaving, Mom," I finally said, my voice quieter than it had been during the confrontation. "I'm just moving on. I'm letting go of something I never had in the first place. Family isn't just about blood or shared history. It's about respect. It's about seeing each other for who we really are. And that's something none of you ever gave me." I watched her face fall, her lips trembling as she took in my words. She looked like she was about to say something, but then she didn't. Instead, she simply nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I could have felt something, anger, sadness, resentment, but I didn't. The truth had been revealed, and I didn't need her to validate it anymore. I was finally free from the expectations that had weighed me down for so long. "I'm proud of who I've become," I continued, my words measured and steady. "And I don't need any of you to tell me that. I've built something of my own, and for the first time, I'm walking away from this place with my head held high." My brothers were still sitting in stunned silence, unable to look me in the eye. James, the one who had always mocked me, couldn't meet my gaze. Luke's face was unreadable, but I saw the shift in his eyes, a flicker of understanding that hadn't been there before. Ben, the youngest, looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore, but he wasn't angry. He was just confused, lost in a world that no longer made sense to him. I didn't owe them anything. I didn't need their acceptance. I had spent my whole life trying to be seen by them, but not anymore. I was done. I walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle, and I paused one last time. This time I looked at my father's portrait on the wall, the one that had always hung above the mantel. It had never been a picture of love for me, just a reminder of a man who had never been there. But now it felt different. I wasn't looking for his approval, not anymore. I wasn't looking for anything from anyone. I turned the handle and stepped out into the cool air, the weight lifting off my shoulders with each step I took toward the exit. The driveway stretched out in front of me, the place that had once been my home, now nothing more than a distant memory. I could feel the sun on my face, warm and steady, as I walked away, knowing I was leaving behind a world that had never truly accepted me. But I wasn't walking away with bitterness. I wasn't walking away with regret. I was walking away free. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. And as I drove away from that estate, away from the family who had never really understood me. I realized something. I didn't need their love or their approval to be whole. I had built something stronger than any family ever could, my own self-worth. For the first time, I felt at peace with who I was.